This presentation is part of a series of video trainings put together by the Urban Justice Center's Domestic Violence Project. The topic of this training is Domestic Violence 101. The purpose of this training is to provide a broad overview of domestic violence to help individuals and advocates alike better understand and recognize the signs of domestic violence. It is not intended to provide legal advice or guidance on any particular case or matter. When in doubt, ask a lawyer. To begin, it might be helpful to note that unfortunately many people who experience abuse do so in silence. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. By learning about domestic violence, we can be better prepared to provide survivors with the support they need to thrive after experiencing abuse. So, let's start with some definitions. The definition of domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behavior perpetrated by an intimate partner or household member with the purpose of establishing and maintaining control. So, we're not just looking at the behavior itself, we are also looking at the context and history to help us better understand what's going on and to help us understand the effect that this pattern of coercive behavior may have on the survivor or survivors. The next term that I want to mention is intimate partner violence, or IPV, which is a specific subset of domestic violence. It is defined the same way as domestic violence is, but now, instead of speaking broadly about a household member, we are talking about the specific dynamics at play between current or former intimate partners. This training is focused on this specific form of domestic violence. Okay. So, how can we make distinctions between intimate partner violence and a healthy relationship? Well, in a healthy relationship, we see things like physical safety, meaning that partners respect each other's physical space and both partners feel physically safe. Sexual respectfulness, meaning that partners never force sexual activity or insist on doing something that the other person isn't comfortable with. Honesty and trust, meaning that partners share their dreams, their fears, and their concerns with each other, and that partners tell each other how they feel. They share important information with each other, and they admit when they're wrong. Equality is another trademark of a healthy relationship, meaning that partners share decision-making power and responsibilities, and they discuss their roles to make sure that they are fair and equal. And respect, meaning that partners respect the other person's opinions, beliefs, family, friends, and interests. In a relationship with IPV, however, many times one or more of these elements is lacking. Abusive partners are controlling and will sometimes take steps to isolate their partner from their partner's friends and family members, and will disregard boundaries of physical comfort. So, who is impacted by intimate partner abuse? The short answer is everyone. Intimate partner abuse affects everyone and can happen to anyone, regardless of their gender identity, sexual orientation, race, socioeconomic status, where they live, etc. It is estimated that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And it is estimated that 10 million women and men are physically abused by their intimate partner in the United States each year. Here is a list of some of the ways in which IPV can manifest itself. This list is not exhaustive, but these are some of the most common forms of behavior that we see with intimate partner violence. These abusive behaviors are purposeful and deliberate with the goal of establishing a fixed imbalance of power. Some behaviors in this pattern can be clearly defined as criminal acts, while others cannot. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, well, how do I know if someone is abusive? And the short and simple answer is that you may not know. It can be very hard to know how someone is acting behind closed doors. There may be instances where you witness some alarming behavior, but sometimes you may have no reason to believe that a person is abusive. That being said, here are some red flags to look out for. Wanting to move quickly into a relationship. If the partner flatters the survivor early on in the relationship to the point that things seem too good to be true. If a partner wants the survivor to spend all of their time with them instead of the survivor spending time with their friends or family. If the partner wants the survivor to stop participating in activities or hobbies, or if the partner wants the survivor to quit school or work. If the partner doesn't honor the survivor's boundaries or exhibits excessive jealousy or accuses the survivor of cheating. Frequent calls, texts, emails, or messages to track the survivor's movements is another red flag, particularly if the partner becomes angry if the survivor does not immediately respond. If a partner criticizes a survivor by calling them names or making negative comments about their appearance, this is another red flag for abuse. And this is particularly true if the partner says things like suggesting that no one will ever love the survivor other than them. A lack of accountability is yet another red flag. If a partner doesn't take responsibility for their own behavior and instead blames others for their actions or circumstances, or if a partner blames the failures from their previous relationships entirely on the other person by saying things like, "My ex was crazy," these may be early indicators for abuse. A history of abuse in a previous relationship is another red flag to be aware of, or if a partner goes into a rage with a survivor but is able to maintain their composure in front of others or in public. You should also take note of times where a partner's words and actions don't match up, as well as a generalized entitled attitude. And along with all of this, forms of financial control can be another indicator of abuse, such as if a partner takes a survivor's money or runs up a debt under their name. This is a picture of the power and control wheel. It is frequently used to illustrate the various ways abuse can manifest. Let's unwind the wheel and take a look at each section one at a time. Isolation. Abusive partners use isolation to establish power and control by eliminating support networks and centering the relationship on their own needs. Once the survivor's support networks are gone, the survivor will become more reliant on their partner and less likely to seek help outside of the relationship. There are a number of ways a partner might accomplish their goal of isolation, such as harassing a survivor's family, friends, and coworkers so that they pull away from the survivor to avoid the harassment, or so that the survivor pulls away from them to prevent their partner from harassing people that they care about. Controlling who a survivor sees and talks to is another way to isolate a survivor. For example, a partner might accuse the survivor of cheating if they are speaking to or seeing other people, or a partner might accuse a survivor's coworker, friend, or family member of being romantically interested in the partner to make the survivor feel jealous and to drive a wedge between the survivor and that person. Controlling what the survivor does. For example, a partner might suggest that a survivor should avoid going to their mother's home because every time the survivor does, the survivor and partner have a fight. Other tools of isolation include checking a survivor's phone, emails, or social media accounts to monitor their conversations and what they're posting, excessive calls and texting to monitor the survivor's movements, controlling the survivor's transportation, such as withholding keys to cars or preventing a survivor from using public transportation, and along with this, controlling access to the home by holding onto keys or locking the survivor out. Now let's look at financial abuse. The goal of financial abuse is to make the survivor economically dependent on their partner. This can be achieved by controlling the household money, or putting all accounts and property in the partner's name only. It can also be achieved by not allowing the survivor to have a separate bank account, or not allowing the survivor to have their own credit or debit cards, making all financial decisions for the couple, controlling public benefits, refusing to pay bills or threatening not to pay bills unless the survivor does certain things, requiring the survivor to justify every purchase and beg for money from their partner to make purchases of their own. Financial abuse can also take the form of the partner sabotaging the survivor's job or sabotaging their job hunt to ensure that the survivor is unable to earn their own money and become financially independent. An example of this might be if a partner calls a survivor's job and complains about them, or if they make the survivor late to work, destroy their uniform, or otherwise interfere with the survivor's ability to earn a living. And finally, financial abuse can come in the form of refusing to pay child support or running up debt under the survivor's name. Another part of the cycle of power and control consists of verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse. This is used by the partner to distort the survivor's sense of self and tear down their self-esteem and self-confidence, making the survivor easier to control. This form of abuse is achieved in a variety of ways, such as name-calling, humiliation, playing mind games, focusing on a survivor's shortcomings and amplifying them, making a survivor feel guilty, ridiculing or downplaying a survivor's successes or strengths, making false promises, forcing someone to act against their religious beliefs or using someone's religious beliefs to justify the partner's actions, and denying the survivor's reality by, for example, gaslighting the survivor to make them question their perception of things. Intimidation is another part of the power and control dynamic. It is used to instill fear in the survivor and to prevent them from seeking help or leaving the relationship. Common forms of intimidation include things like destroying property or furniture, punching or kicking walls, making gestures suggesting violence, abusing pets or animals, stalking, for example, following a survivor down the street or waiting for a survivor outside of their home, or even sending a survivor unwanted gifts, or displaying weapons or making a survivor aware that a partner has access to weapons. The next wedge of the wheel that I want to address is coercion and threats. Coercion and threats are used by a partner to instill fear in a survivor and make them feel as though they have no choice but to go along with what the partner wants. Examples of this include threats of suicide or threatening to harm or kill the survivor or someone that the survivor cares about. And this includes threats against the survivor's pets. If there are children involved, a partner may threaten to take the children away from the survivor or may threaten to call Child Protective Services on the survivor. A partner may also threaten legal action against the survivor, for example, threatening to hire an expensive attorney to sue the survivor. Or if the survivor is undocumented, a partner may threaten to call ICE and get the survivor deported. A partner may also threaten to out a survivor's sexual orientation or sexual activity to their friends or family, or may threaten to damage the survivor's professional and personal reputation by disclosing intimate images or videos of the survivor. For example, threatening to send naked photos of a survivor to the survivor's parents or boss, or posting a sex tape of the survivor on the internet. And lastly, threats to leave a survivor can also be a form of coercion. As mentioned before, a partner may use children to establish power and control over a survivor and undermine a survivor's parental authority. Examples of this can include making a survivor feel guilty about the impact the abuse may be having on the children, or making the survivor feel as though the children will suffer if the survivor leaves the partner. As mentioned before, any threats to take the children away from the survivor, or any instances where the partner actually takes the children away from the survivor or refuses to let the survivor see or have contact with their children, is another way in which a partner can use children to establish power and control. A partner may also try to turn children against their survivor parent by involving children in custody disputes, or by trying to convince children that the survivor is responsible for any problems in the relationship, or that the survivor deserves the abuse. As part of this, a survivor may instruct children to watch or record the abuse, or may humiliate and ridicule the survivor in front of the children to undermine the survivor's parental authority. In some instances, a partner may even encourage a child to mimic the abuse and berate and attack the survivor themselves, or may encourage the child to spy on the survivor for the partner by, for example, bribing the children with money or gifts. If the partner and survivor are no longer in a relationship, a former partner may use visitation exchanges as an opportunity to harass the survivor, or may use children as an excuse to maintain contact and control over the survivor by, for example, putting tracking devices or hidden cameras in children's toys or backpacks. Along with using children to establish control and perpetrate abuse, a partner may also abuse or mistreat children to keep a survivor in line. For example, a partner may ruin major events that are important to the children, or insult, ridicule, or humiliate them to break down their self-esteem. An abusive partner may also cause a child emotional harm by bringing up issues or troubling memories which they know will upset them. Favoritism can be another way in which an abusive partner mistreats children, by, for example, buying gifts for one child and not another, or by showering one child with praise and affection while ignoring the other. And in some instances, an abusive partner may physically abuse or sexually assault children, or threaten to do so as a way to control a survivor parent. Contradictory statements and beliefs can also be used to establish and maintain power and control. Examples of this can include promises to help a survivor and then failing to follow through, instances where a partner promises to change their ways and seek counseling but never does, behaving loving and caring while in public but cruel or disdainful behind closed doors, or questioning a survivor's mental health or parental fitness, particularly if the partner tries to convince others of this distorted view of the survivor. Minimizing, denying, or blaming can also be used to shift responsibility for the abuse from the partner onto the survivor or onto outside factors. For example, a partner might blame drugs or alcohol for their behavior, or may bring up details from their bad childhood to excuse or minimize the abuse. A partner may also try to convince a survivor that it is their fault that they are experiencing abuse by saying things like, "If you hadn't done X, I wouldn't have reacted that way." Privilege can also be used to exert power and control. People enter relationships holding all different kinds of privilege based on things like their gender, country of birth, education, or physical abilities. In an abusive relationship, a partner may use their privilege to assert and reinforce their control and superiority over the survivor. A common example of this occurs when there is a U.S. citizen partner and an undocumented survivor. In such a situation, the U.S. citizen partner does not have to worry about being deported and may use this to threaten and control a survivor who does not share that privilege and who may, for example, be afraid to report incidents of abuse to law enforcement. We can see privilege asserted in all types of situations, including gender, race, sexual orientation, cultural background, language, class, religion, and health. Understanding all of the emotional, psychological, and financial forms of abuse, we can't forget the various ways in which abuse can physically manifest itself, such as pinching, hitting, punching, burning, twisting of arms or fingers, interfering with a person's access to food, water, medications, or medical care, and in particular, doing anything that makes it difficult for a person to breathe, such as sitting on their chest or back, choking, suffocation, or strangulation. It should be noted that when it comes to physical abuse, strangulation is a particularly dangerous form of abuse which significantly increases the risk of death or serious bodily harm. And the final wedge of the power and control wheel addresses various forms of sexual abuse, such as rape, sexual assault, disclosing or threatening to disclose intimate images of a survivor, denying access or interfering with birth control, forcing a survivor to participate in demeaning sexual acts, or making a survivor feel as though they can't say no, or making them feel guilty if they do. Although not officially part of the power and control wheel, it should be noted that as technology advances, abusers are finding various ways to exert power and control over survivors remotely through cyberspace, by doing things like hacking social media accounts, creating fake profiles, and in some instances, creating deep-face videos and images of survivors to make it seem like they are doing or saying things that they never did or said. Okay, so now that we have familiarized ourselves with many of the common power and control methods used by partners, it is important to understand the impact that this abuse can have. The effects of abuse can take days, weeks, months, or even years to surface. But it is important to note that not everyone reacts to abuse in the same way, and there is no one right way for a survivor to respond to abuse. That being said, here are some of the ways in which a survivor might react. Physical reactions can include things like fatigue, nausea, headaches, chest pain, difficulty breathing, dizziness, fainting, and in some instances, lasting injuries from past incidents of abuse. Abuse can also impact a survivor's cognitive functioning, leading to confusion, difficulty paying attention, difficulties with memories, hypervigilance, so always being on guard, nightmares or night terrors, difficulties with problem solving, and poor decision making in general. A survivor may also demonstrate emotional symptoms, such as feelings of anxiety, guilt, grief, or depression, severe panic attacks or feelings of fear or uncertainty, feeling overwhelmed, irritable, or angry, or having difficulty trusting others. A survivor might also experience a loss of emotional response, which is sometimes described as feelings of numbness or a flat affect. And abuse can also cause behavioral changes. For example, a survivor might change their routines or disengage from activities that they previously participated in. A survivor might become suspicious or prone to emotional outbursts, or might appear jumpy or easily startled. Changes in appetite might also occur, as well as substance abuse as a form of self-medication. So, knowing all of this, it is not uncommon to wonder why some survivors stay in these abusive relationships. But one important thing to keep in mind is that it takes the average survivor 7 attempts to completely leave an abusive relationship for good. And this is because of a variety of factors. For starters, a survivor may fear their partner's reaction to their leaving. And this is a reasonable fear. One of the most dangerous times for a survivor is when they are trying to leave a relationship. Once the partner knows the survivor is leaving, it can cause the partner to escalate their behavior. And for this reason, leaving a relationship can actually put a survivor at more risk for serious injury or death. And this is why it is so very important for survivors to think through and have a plan for how to safely leave an abusive relationship. Another reason why it takes survivors so long to leave comes down to the effects of the abuse itself. As we discussed earlier, domestic violence is a pattern where a partner uses many tactics at once to establish control. After months and years of being manipulated, threatened, beaten, and put down, a survivor may start to believe that their abusive partner is right and that they do not deserve anything better than that. This long-term erosion of self-confidence can make it very difficult for a survivor to leave their abusive partner. Cultural and gender norms can also make it difficult for some people to leave an abusive relationship. For example, some people's backgrounds teach them that divorce is unacceptable and that once married, there is a duty to remain in the relationship and make it work. In these circumstances, a person may remain in an abusive relationship for fear of bringing shame on themselves or their family. Additionally, some people may believe that certain abusive or controlling behaviors are acceptable within the context of marriage. It is important to understand where a survivor is coming from and not to judge others for their beliefs. Immigration status, or lack thereof, can also make it difficult for a survivor to leave an abusive relationship. There may be a fear that an abusive partner will retaliate by calling ICE on the survivor or by refusing to help the survivor get legal status within the United States. There may also be language barriers which prevent some immigrant survivors from seeking or receiving help in the United States. Economic dependence is another barrier. For all of the reasons we spoke about during the financial abuse section, survivors can become economically dependent on their abusive partner, making it very difficult to leave. Survivors may also feel guilty for considering leaving an abusive relationship. For example, survivors who have been told over and over again that they are to blame for the abuse may feel at fault for the failure of their relationship. Some survivors may also stay in an abusive relationship because they believe that their children are better off growing up with both parents, especially in instances where the survivor is aware that their children want their parents to remain together. Survivors may also remain in abusive relationships to protect their children from their partner. This can be particularly true in situations where, for example, a survivor is a step-parent to their abusive partner's children. In such a situation, a survivor may be afraid of what will happen to the children of the household if they are no longer there to intervene. Love is yet another reason why people stay. Situations aren't cut and dry, and a survivor and their abusive partner may have likely shared some happy times together and life milestones. A partner may also have some good qualities which attracted the survivor to them in the first place. As such, it can be hard to walk away from a relationship where you were once happy and give up any hope that things might change for the better in the future. Disability can be another barrier, particularly if a survivor relies on their abusive partner to care for them or help them navigate certain spaces. Feelings of embarrassment or shame can also prevent a survivor from talking about the abuse they've experienced and seeking help. And this is especially true for members of the LGBTQ community who may have a fear of being outed by their abusive partner. Abusive partners may threaten to out a survivor as a way to force the survivor to stay in their relationship. Survivors may not have come out to the people in their lives and may be afraid of what will happen if the abusive partner discloses this information to their family or coworkers. And lastly, as we touched on briefly before when talking about cultural and gender norms, a survivor may not report abuse because they simply don't recognize abusive behavior as abusive behavior. For a variety of reasons, a survivor may interpret abusive behavior as normal and acceptable. Before we move on, though, it is important to recognize that for all of the reasons that a survivor might stay in an abusive relationship, as a society, we should be aware of the various social structures which make it possible for abusers to abuse in the first place and which make it more difficult for survivors to escape these situations. Knowing all of this, what should you do if someone discloses to you that they are a survivor of domestic violence? For starters, it is important to remain respectful and non-judgmental and be mindful of your own biases and assumptions. Listen to the survivor and take their fears seriously. It is also important to validate a survivor's feelings and experiences. As a service provider, it is important to avoid recreating a dependent relationship between you and the survivor. Instead, you should work to empower the survivor to make informed decisions on their own and then support them once they make them. And this is true even if you would have made a different decision for yourself, or if you can't understand a survivor's reasoning. The survivor gets to choose for themselves. They know their partner best, and they should have the power to make decisions on how best to protect themselves. Understanding this, one of the most important ways that we can help survivors as service providers is by working with them to create a safety plan to minimize their risk of harm. Safety planning can be a helpful tool at all stages of the abusive relationship. The safety suggestions provided on the following slides have been compiled from safety plans distributed by state domestic violence coalitions from around the country. And although these suggestions cannot guarantee safety for survivors, they can be helpful to improve and promote safety for them. So let's look at some safety planning that can be implemented while a survivor is still living with their abusive partner. For starters, it is important for a survivor to familiarize themselves with an abusive partner's patterns of behavior. It might be helpful to keep a journal of incidents with dates and details about what happened and store this journal in a safe place. Find safe places in the home that a survivor can go to in an emergency. For example, kitchens should generally be avoided since they usually contain weapons such as knives and other dangerous items. Survivors should also avoid wearing things around their neck, such as scarves or long jewelry that could potentially be used to strangle. While living with an abusive partner, a survivor should practice escaping the home more than once in the same way that you might prepare in case of fire or a natural disaster. Along with escape drills, if possible, survivors should consider packing an emergency bag and stashing it in a safe place or with family or friends. Code words or coded behavior can also be helpful so that survivors can alert others that they are in danger. For example, someone might text their friend, "I'm going to make banana bread," or bang on the wall 3 times to alert informed neighbors that they need help. If children are involved, it is important to discuss the safety plan with them so they know what to do if an abusive partner becomes violent or if their parent is injured. It is also important for survivors to memorize any important phone numbers and to make and save copies of important documents or evidence somewhere outside of the home to preserve them in case the partner tries to destroy them. Survivors should secure their electronic information and be aware of what accounts their partner may have access to. And finally, survivors should be prepared for what might happen if their partner discovers their safety plan. When planning on leaving, survivors should make a plan for how they are going to leave, when they are going to leave, and where they are going to go when they do. For example, a survivor should consider leaving when their partner will least expect it, and should consider whether they want to go to a DV shelter or stay with family and friends. Survivors should consider putting aside as much money as possible and should consider hiding an extra set of car keys or a spare Metro card in an easily accessible place. Survivors should think about ways their partners can track their movements and might consider creating a false trail to make it harder for a partner to follow a survivor once they leave. For example, survivors should make sure that location services, for example, For example, survivors should make sure that location services are turned off on their location devices and that geotagging is disabled on their social media accounts. Safety planning doesn't end once a survivor is out of the relationship. In order to maintain safety, a survivor should consider changing their locks, phone numbers, mailing address, work hours, and a general routine. Safety planning doesn't end once a survivor is out of the relationship. In order to maintain safety, a survivor should consider changing their locks, phone numbers, mailing address, work hours, and general routine. Survivors should speak with an attorney or advocate to discuss whether getting an order of protection might be a good option for them. Survivors should also avoid traveling alone if possible, and should consider getting a full medical checkup to assess for any health consequences of the abuse they've experienced. And finally, survivors should consider staying in touch with a local DV organization or a DV support group. Safety planning can be a great way to mitigate the risk of harm, but if you are in immediate danger, please call 911 or leave as soon as possible. And if you are hurt, please go to a local hospital emergency room. Thank you for watching this video training on DV 101. We hope that it has been helpful and informative. As a reminder, this training is not intended to provide any legal advice or guidance on any particular case or matter. When in doubt, ask a lawyer.